Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm David Marinak from the Repackaging Revolution. Before I introduce our guest for today, let me start with what we call a Marinak musing, or a power statement. Packaging is often misunderstood, thought of at the last time, and often sold as a commodity. My guest and I share a common bond, and packaging, specialty packaging, is so much more. You've got to protect the customer's product, keep it fresher for longer, create and promote a company's brand, dig deeper and to uncover and discover why a company, or what a company's environmental goals, sustainability, recyclability is, and much more. And of course, marketing innovation. Matthew Rogerson from the Pack Scout, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, David.
I'm excited to talk. You know, a lot of times in these situations, in these little podcasts, it's such a unique medium for us to kind of A, get to know each other, and then B, kind of form around that common bond that we have, AKA the crazy packaging business that we're in. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll dig into a little bit more about the Pack Scout. Is that fair?
My background is started off in sales, moved to sales marketing management for speed dating events for packaging. So they were events that connected the people who ran the procurement for packaging brand owners with people in their supply chain who fulfilled those needs.
Right.
Moved from that into editorial, where I ran a number of global publications that focused on the packaging industry, mainly technical. So Packaging Today and Converting Today looked at the brand side and the converter side. And then there were specialist publications for the beverage, cosmetics, sustainability, and then there's a sort of an altogether one for packaging and converting intelligence. All of those were for about 9 years in the UK. And the almost entirety of my career has been in the UK up till about 2 years ago, where I moved into manufacturing. I was working with Jindal North Americas, so the old Exxon assets. And then I left them in the beginning of this year, and that took me into the Pack Scout. So it's been a kind of a bit of a dance around
journey.
Sales.
Yeah. Dance is a good word. I like it.
So sales, marketing. My main focus over the last probably 10 to 15 years has been communicating technical subjects to all people. So that everybody can understand it. And then more recently, it's been a case of how do you actually do better with sustainability, with marketing, with communications, with innovations, because there's still a bit of a disconnect between what we make for consumers and what consumers think what we should be making for them. And so that's the sort of the area that I'd like to play in the most over the last probably 5 to 10 years.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's going to open up the kind of the meat and potatoes of our discussion today. I totally get that, because I think there's a huge opportunity, and you and I have shared some emails back and forth, but take me to, and again, thank you for the background, but take me to the Pack Scout. This is the structure, if you will, for you to start to kind of really bring your ideas, bring your knowledge to the market. Tell me about the Pack Scout.
So what I'm trying to do is find a better way to problem solve in packaging. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the supply chain, so whether it's converted to brand or brand to consumer or converted to brand to consumer, whichever way it kind of plays in that whole life cycle and supply chain, that's the area that I have 20 years of experience in. The experience I have is slightly unique in that I've spent the majority of my career as a spectator. So I've been able to have an overview over what's happening in the entire market and be agnostic to whether it's food or pharmaceutical or beverage, etc. And what that's helped with mainly is giving the ability to cross-fertilize ideas a lot more quickly, because a lot of the time in packaging, as you're very familiar, people tend to kind of silo. So people are like, so if somebody works in the food industry, whatever part of the chain they work in, they don't think about what the cosmetics people are doing or how that might benefit a problem they're facing in their immediate day-to-day. So the Pack Scout is to basically grow a community of packaging experts to focus more on asking the packaging industry how they're going to solve the packaging industry's problems rather than asking consumers how they're going to solve them, or marketing people or branding people or operations. So the idea is to kind of make them a little bit more stewards of their own destiny in terms of how they're going to address some of these major topics that they're juggling at the moment in the industry. The best way that I've found to do that is to focus on intention. So not what people tell me they're going to do, but what they're actually doing. So that's been the focus.
Big difference. 100%.
So that's the main thing that I'm involved in at the moment. It's how do you understand what the real need is?
Yeah.
How can you create a conversation that will solve what their stated needs are rather than talking about what we think people want to talk about? So how do we move the needle forward? How do we help them with their roles and their ability to kind of get their businesses and their careers going in the right path? That's the sort of the areas like.
So let's stay with that. You've touched on a lot of hot buttons for me in a very good way, because I too have been in this business for a long time, and there's a lot of people that say one thing and do another. There's also a lot of companies from one side saying, we're going to be environmentally friendly. We're going to change. And then by the time it gets to another department in the same company, it's already been sliced and diced. And then on the other hand, the global sourcing and being able to kind of look at things, if there's anything that's missing, and that's why I'm really glad that we're talking, because I really like to emphasize when we start a conversation, a lot of times there are companies and situations that just assume, especially when it comes to like food or industrial packaging or whatever it is, people just assume whatever it is the other people do and are doing, that's the way it's always been. If there's anything, for example, I can't tell you how many times people will look to, let's just say protein powder. And somebody in the protein powder space has a 2-pound rigid container, which takes up how much space? And it's inefficient, costs about $3 a piece. And yet everybody wants to mimic what Jocko's doing or what GNC has, even though you could get into a flexible pouch that'll hold the same amount and take up a fraction of the space, cost about 85% less, is recyclable, is a huge sustainable example. But you would think, and I know you can relate to this, you would think that you're trying to, convince these people why aren't other people doing this? It just doesn't, you know what I mean? And that's, speaking of, like you had mentioned, you said something that really caught my attention, forming and creating a community for people to share ideas and at least get a place where people can kind of begin to discover what's truly available. Because I think, a lot of times people don't have the time to go and a lot of times these sourcing agents or buyers or designers or engineers, they're working 17-hour days. They're going to Uline, they're going to Grainger, and they don't think of packaging to protect their brand or build their brand or protect their product or whatever. They think of packaging at the last minute, and that's a huge disservice to their product, to their company, to their customers, if you ask me. But, just would love to get your take on that if you see where I'm going, because we've got to make change. And I think you're right. We have to be able to do it in a community that's not trying to sell them anything, just kind of discussing what's available. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I mean, you've touched on something that over the last probably 10 to 15 years is getting better. I guess it depends on perspective. So when we look at this with our eyes as being people who are interested in or working in or fascinated by what the packaging industry is and how it works, there's a way that you look at the industry and just think, how has there not been the common sense to do something previously? Because, as you said, it's sort of occasionally it's the way things have always been done. So nothing ever changes. So we kind of end up in this sort of same loop.
100%.
There's two direct examples of what you were talking about, where I had one of my oldest customers, clients, now friend, because we've been working together for decades, in one of the major cleaning products. So this is for dishwasher detergent. And, obvious who it is. And they had exactly what you're talking about. They put the powder into a bag, into a pouch, and they had taken 30-40% of the emissions. They had reduced their material usage. They could put more into trucks to get them where they needed to get going. Every single possible metric that they were using in the packaging department was coming up aces. They were saying, look, if we make this switch, we're just going to almost immediately save ourselves like 20-30% on the overall cost.
At least.
Branding said, the consumers won't understand. So we're going to stick with our cardboard kind of circular, kind of box that we've got at the moment, because that's what they understand. That kind of wall that they hit internally, this doesn't even, wasn't even like they kind of asked all the consumers worldwide. It got stopped inside their own business. And it's indicative of the area which I think companies are getting better at, but they still haven't quite solved, which is that packaging is still the kind of unwanted orphan sometimes in the kind of the hierarchy. Exactly. So what happens is they come to them at the very end and they're like, oh, we've come up with this amazing concept and idea and thing. And then somebody in engineering has to say to them, you can't make that, or it's not going to work, or it's not going to fit in the way that we kind of make things. And then they get very upset about the fact that, packaging are killing their project. And you're just saying to them what can and can't be made.
Exactly. So let's stay with that because, I went through something similar, and I'll just name names. I mean, Walmart in particular, because they've got so many different SKUs, but Walmart in particular told one of our, it was a protein powder company, that one side they wanted a rigid container, the other side they wanted flexible, and then the other said we can't have any plastic at all. 3 different things, same different project, same different company. And no wonder why we're going nowhere. No wonder why we live in a society, especially in the packaging world, of me too. Well, that's the way it's always been done. That's the way. And I think to myself, good gracious, for all the 7th generation type of companies that are out there that are aggressively looking, or Method Soap, forget 7th generation, Method Soap is another one that said, hey, we're doing something that's going to be part of our brand. It's not only the liquid soap, but part of our brand and how we package it. Flexible spouts, all this kind of stuff. And they took off like a rocket. So we know that consumers, a lot of times, they want it, but how? So let me go back to my original question. How do we change this? What do we do in order to get this Titanic to begin to turn? Does that make any sense? Any thoughts on that? And by the way, there's no right or wrong. That's why I like just talking with a colleague like this, because you and I are just riffing on, well, what do we do? What do we do? This is crazy, especially in the U.S.
Yeah, that's been probably the biggest difference in these last couple of years, is just the number of times when you kind of scratch your head thinking, how is it that the market that should have the resources and the breadth and depth of technology and companies and ability to do these things is lagging behind Poland or Hungary or Romania, because people are just always doing what they've always done. So they always get what they've always got. The 2 big things that I've seen that hopefully would answer or be in the realms of answering what you're talking about. The first is there was the Simon Sinek book about the infinite game, which I loved. I think he's great anyway. But when he's talking,
well, so do I. What's the title?
The Infinite Game. Now, what he talks about there is that there's things in the world that, while they might appear as a game, it's not a structure. Like, you don't have necessarily rules. You don't have winners and losers. So marriage, friendship, work, you're never going to win work. You're always just going to be kind of, so the idea of the infinite game is saying, well, rather than trying to win something, which is not possible to win, what you need to do is you need to have a mindset that you're just going to be in it for the infinite amount of time, which
the long haul.
Exactly. And if you have that mindset, what actually happens as a sidestep to that is true sustainability, because the actual ability to sustain that, whatever it is, infinitely is basically what we're all trying to do anyway. So the infinite game, as it applies to sustainability, is what I talk to a lot of my clients about at the moment, which is just saying to them, look, trying to kind of hit quarterly targets or yearly manufacturing targets, all it's doing is it's just making you lose sight of the fact that, in fact, your only job should be to be, like Coca-Cola to be Coca-Cola in 100 years or 1,000 years time. And if you have that mindset, like we're going to be Nestle in 1,000,000 years time, everything you do is far more future focused, and everything you use your resources for helps you to keep on going down that much longer route rather than being like, I'm worried about what's happening next Tuesday or around the corner. The next step is that you need to focus on the cost and scale parts. So there's been too much focus on technology, not the technology that then scale appropriately.
100%.
And so the problem with that is that, you're kind of using those finite resources in this infinite game on the wrong thing. So again, if you look much further down the line, so if I think to myself, I want to be still bottling bottles in, 100 years time, then my equipment is going to be far more effective than if I just think to myself, I want to raise my production by 10% this year, or I want to fill, 5 more bottles an hour or whatever it is. And then the other part of it is in sustainability is that there's a constant focus by the communications of companies, particularly brands, because obviously they're the ones that are consumer facing, where they talk about these innovations or developments or, milestones that they're hitting, but they're always milestones that are relevant to that company. So, we in Unilever have taken £1 million of packaging off of our thing. And as a consumer, you see that and you're like, okay, but what about me? It hasn't dropped the price. It hasn't made it, easier for me to recycle. It hasn't made it easier for me to hit my sustainability targets.
Yeah, exactly.
So all you're doing is telling me how you've benefited yourself. And that huge disconnect is probably the biggest fundamental area that I find myself talking about the most as needing to get fixed.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. On that note, is it just the US that's like that, or globally in your travels? Is this
Globally.
Disconnect?
Globally.
Interesting.
And so the problem in Europe was when we started the kind of modern version of the sustainability journey. So probably about 2017, 2018. 2018 was the Davos big kind of kickoff where everybody started signing their plastic pact.
Yep.
So in the run up to that, so in the last 5 years, 6 years, the first major issue was that people didn't really understand what sustainability meant, or it meant different things to different people. So you had this kind of Tower of Babel where everybody's like talking about sustainability and meaning completely different things.
Totally
different. That had to get cleaned up.
Yeah,
which is
100%.
It's kind of been mainly through things like life cycle analysis and being able to kind of say,
thank you.
Let's find a way to kind of get some kind of common ground so we can compare apples to apples rather than what we were doing before. Their recycling activity, so in flexible packaging with C-Flex, when they initially started the program and they're saying for circular economy for the flexible packaging market, they said, okay, well, we're not going to really get 100% monomaterial on a pouch or a label or whatever, because it's always going to have a coating or ink or something exactly on it. But 95% or initially 90% makes sense. And the recyclers were able to say, okay, well, we can work with that. We can reclaim, 90% or 95% of that pouch. So you started to kind of see some quite big gains, but all of that's been a kind of trial and error. And the problem with all of these developments is every time you have one of these big steps forward, they then still aren't telling it. They aren't putting into consumers' words. They're not putting it into ways that you or I would go into a supermarket and be like, oh, hell yeah, I'm going to buy, this thing because it's easy to dispose of and it's still the same great product and whatever else speaks to me about it. Yeah.
You've touched on so many different topics with this too. And I you're so spot on. So first of all, are you familiar with Dr. Chris DeArmond at all?
Yes.
He's another Brit. Okay.
Yeah.
So Dr. Chris and I have worked together, and I love his stuff for the simple fact that this isn't an anti-plastic, anti-paper, whatever it is, but he's often talking about just sharing the facts, sharing the data, sharing the information. And one of the things he taught me from the very beginning was the LCA, or the life cycle analysis, that you mentioned, which is so critical. that's like a foreign language here in the US. There's not a lot of people that are talking about LCAs, and I'm determined to change that, just for the simple fact that that's really how you judge an effectiveness, like you were describing. You can say and pat yourself on the back that, we're doing all this great stuff here at XYZ company, but if it's not getting down to the consumer level or the retail level for people actually to understand it and comprehend that, it's very much a very selfish kind of doing things. My point with saying this is the LCA is such a great way. For those that don't know, it's a life cycle analysis. It's done independently and basically looks at all the different factors pertaining to a type of package, what it takes to make it, the energy, the raw materials, and then what it takes to create it, what it takes to ship it, what it takes to pick it back up, what it takes to regrind it or make it into something else. Whatever. Am I describing that right, Matthew? Because that's one of the things, especially with the life cycle analysis, if you're going to compare two different types of packaging, you have to look at the whole thing. You can't just say, well, this is better than another one. Glass is better than this plastic because glass, I can recycle it. Yeah, but in the U.S., I just got off the podcast with another guy, and that we were describing here in the Midwest, in Ohio, where I'm at, we have no glass recyclers. We have to truck that about 17 states over. And that just you want to talk about affecting a life cycle analysis. If I'm a spaghetti sauce company or a pickle company using glass, and I'm thinking I'm doing right for the industry, if you will, or for sustainability. But if you look at how much fuel and energy and time and space it takes to ship it to Washington State, then grind that glass back up, and then clean that glass, and then ship it all the way back into Ohio to make it, you know what I mean? It's just, and that's where it's such I just wonder why, and maybe you don't know, but I just wonder why so few people know about life cycle analysis. And I mean, was it, I know it's not new to you because I know overseas they've been doing and they've been talking about it, but am I crazy, or is it just me that don't know anything about these life cycle analysis? And I think people need to know it.
I don't think it's just you. I mean, there was a message on LinkedIn yesterday, for example, where Delta Airlines have moved their cups in flights to paper cups. And they were talking about this as a sustainability milestone and big step. They were saying, we've taken 7 million pounds of plastic by changing those plastic cups out into paper cups. The first comment back to it was somebody saying, okay, but that doesn't actually make sense, because if you look at it Correct. From a life cycle analysis, I mean, things that are terrifying about water is it was 10 liters of water to make a A4 sheet of paper.
Really?
So 10 liters. So that's like 2 gallons, maybe a bit over, two to two and a half gallons of water to make a standard kind of small poster-sized piece of paper. Again, Chris and other people have come up with it. It's usually something like 6 times paper to plastic. So when everybody says, I've removed 1 million pounds of plastic, they've probably had to replace it with about 6 million pounds of paper, just because that's the kind of the way that it kind of is made. Time and time again, I keep on seeing, significantly large companies make these kind of statements. And in Europe for probably 10 years now, there's been a focus on what they call cradle to grave life cycle analysis.
Yep.
So from when you make it all the way through to when it finally gets streamed and disposed of and either wasted or recycled or reused. And as you described it, it really is, it's everything, so in the case of tree of paper, it's, it's the sunlight and energy needed to grow the tree, and then the tree needs to get processed, and then the paper needs to get processed, and then the paper ends up going to a recycling plant. And then it gets kind of reused or baled or kind of skipped and recycled. And the same for plastic, the same for metal, the same for glass. And it's great because what it does is a life cycle analysis gives you a much more...
That's a bigger picture.
Yeah, balanced view, because all the materials have all got strengths and weaknesses. So there's,
Right.
so whenever they talk about plastic at the moment, I mean, it's the kind of easy one to hate on, but there's so many reasons why when they talk about fit for purpose, they use plastic because it's the best tool for the job in most cases.
Right.
But it's got poor recycling records, or, it might end up in trash, or, worst case scenarios, it ends up getting into water and everybody has a complete fit about it. But
Exactly.
each one of these different ones, like there was a report recently where they were looking at the problems of food packaging in paper, particularly for things like takeaway, where there's like grease or there's anything that's kind of like food contact, because then
food service.
Exactly. They've usually got a light plastic or chemical coating to protect them from kind of, like just falling apart and not being fit for purpose.
Right. Oh, yeah, exactly.
And they were saying that all of that meant that particular material stream was worse. So the paper was worse recycled at like 40% wasted rather than 19% plastic and 19% glass. So glass and plastic together were more efficient than paper in the, takeaway food sort of service industry. So it's crazy how many times in the last couple of years, we were talking to people and just saying to them, have you done a life cycle analysis? Have you considered everything in terms of why you're going to make a move into this product? They would just go, either no, or that's not something that we need, or, most people just didn't think about it. And then what would happen?
Or even know what the hell it is.
Yeah. And, what would happen is very quickly on, they'd start their project and they'd hit some kind of hurdle or obstacle that would have been clearly marked from the life cycle analysis, where suddenly they say, actually it's costing us, 10 times as much electricity or more water. Or the best description of life cycle analysis we had years ago, the easiest way to understand it for most people, was they talked about resource efficiency. So all the resources, so the energy, the pricing, the raw materials,
I like that.
It's just trying to make sure that you really consider everything and use everything as sparingly as possible rather than wasting any, resources, because whether it's solar power or water or heat or whatever.
Because this is resources.
Exactly.
Yeah. Again, we could talk for days. One of the reasons why I started this podcast and one of the reasons why I connected with Dr. Chris was it's not whether I believe him or not. He's a good man. He does his work. He's not promoting his research, and he gets vilified online by these thumb gangsters, we call them, that just go and attack him, saying that, oh, you're making this stuff up. If anyone looked at his information from his books to his documents, it's not his research. He's a scientist. He's picking this research up, saying like, so his point when it comes to the Delta Airlines, before that, it was Alaskan Airlines patting themselves on the back that we're going to eliminate all plastic cups. But it's so interesting, and it drives Dr. Chris nuts, myself nuts, and anybody else that's in this world, because they're just choosing. Delta Airlines is just choosing to take the easy route. They haven't done any studies. They are looking for the quick win for their customers to go, wow, I fly with Delta, and look, they do, and look how they're helping the environment. And that's the crux of this whole thing, that there's the anti-plastic group that's out there. Very, very well funded, Matthew. Very, very well funded by political action committees whose whole job is to blow holes into the plastic industry. And that's where this has become there's such an imbalance. And, companies like Greenpeace that are not the company Greenpeace was founded to be right now. It's become a very, very a weapon. And the point I'm getting at is, and Chris has said this a million times, that they're taking that easy win and not paying attention to the big picture. And just like you had mentioned, if they even took 10 minutes to talk, there are life cycle analyses they don't even have to pay for right now that have already been done on cups and paper and all this other stuff. But it's easier for them to pat themselves on the back and not even go there. And it drives me nuts. And that's one of the reasons why, one of the topics that's part of this community that we're building and trying to just get people to share is that life cycle analysis, sustainability, know the truth, know the terminology, know what this actually means. I can't tell you, and I know you would agree with this. I'm at a trade show and somebody comes up and says, I've got to change my packaging. I need something more recyclable. No, more sustainable. Okay. Do you mean recyclable? Yes. Or are you talking biodegradable? That too. It's got to be eco-friendly and compostable. Wait a minute. You've just described all these are all the buzzwords. Nobody knows. And again, that's where, unfortunately here in the US where John Q. Public is, they don't understand. And for me, my frustration is if we don't get people like you and I, Chris, and, some of the other folks like Medulla in the UK, another great firm when it comes to just speaking the truth, Medusa, I'm sorry. The point is that this is so miscued. This is so skewed and so mixed up. And like I said, I sell all packaging. If a customer wants paper packet, I'll sell them to them. That's no problem. I'm not here to hit somebody over the head, but don't tell me that it's better than something else if you don't know. And my whole plan with all this is I wanted to create a community, and thank you for just listening to me riff here. I wanted to create a community that's not salesy. I don't want it to be selling anything. I want people to be able to kind of go and find their own information that's documented, because that's the only way long-term we're going to make change. I mean, it just drives me crazy how messed up this whole system is, right? Especially in the US.
The other thing that always strikes me is strange is because there's that lower hanging fruit focus where the company will say, like, we've taken packaging out of our mix, so that
right.
That's the kind of the sustainability. That's the kind of the biggest club for sustainability at the moment, because
it's the easiest.
Most people can kind of figure out that, okay, well, if you're making less, then there's less waste or whatever. So it's a kind of an easy to compute.
Yep.
But the number of times when so for sticking with Delta, for example, they could have made life a lot simpler. Like, if their true sustainability journey is to kind of, be better, and, their focus is cups, talk to McDonald's or Starbucks or Costa or Amazon or anybody who does this, because they'll tell you what you're doing isn't going to work, because we did it 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And we realized after all of this that basically reusable cups, if you could if you could get passengers to just bring their own cups on board, it'd solve the whole problem. And obviously, that's then putting a step into that process, which they don't want to kind of consider. But a lot of these companies, they don't ask people who've been there before. They don't ask for help. They don't and then they come and then they'll have a statement like this where the first few comments, were people like me and people like Miles and then eventually Chris saying, we just want to understand, because you say these things to us as if it's a kind of a big step forward.
As if they know.
Yeah. And it's not correct. So
it's not true.
Either if you don't want to do the LCA yourself, speak to somebody who's been there before. And that doesn't take much research,
right.
And you think, so cups is a great one, because the UK had it's ongoing still, but Frugal Cup's probably the closest. But they've had at least a 6-year, 7-year period of people trying to solve this problem, whether it's paper, whether it's plastic, whether it's refill, whether it's reusable, like what is the best way of doing it? And I don't think anybody's got, an answer, because obviously it'll be, dependent on a number of other different factors. Sure. But at least if you have that resource, so they don't have to. And then also if they ask somebody like Starbucks, you're not asking your competitor. It's not like asking Alaskan or, British Airways to sort of, help you out, because obviously that's going to be a different conversation.
I know. Right. Exactly.
But there are people out there who have done what you're trying to do. Like, there's very little in the packaging industry that is groundbreaking in terms of, kind of out the box innovation that no one's ever possibly thought of before.
Right.
So, 9 out of 10 times, probably more, you'll find somebody has done something that is at least similar to what you're thinking about doing. And if you have that conversation with them beforehand, it can just save you a huge amount of resources and resource inefficiency. So it cycles back to that thing again.
And to that point, and I totally hear you, and I agree with you 100%, but getting people and companies to do that, I'm thinking beyond that. Here's my take. I can't tell you how many times I'll see people like you, Chris, anybody that's out there that are making comments. I don't even get the brand to even respond. The brand doesn't even engage. The brand makes this statement, if you will. I remember this happened with like a big cosmetics company that was patting themselves on the back for going from a pouch to like this glass or something like that. I'm like, you're a knucklehead. What are you doing? But the point is that I looked this guy up on LinkedIn. I poked him individually. I was like, just help me understand the logic here. You're making this, and it was a big brand like a L'Oreal or somebody. It was a big brand, and this guy. But the point is he didn't care. And again, I don't want to make a statement because I don't want to get sued that Delta doesn't care. That's not the point. What I'm saying is they haven't done all of their homework. Because and again, you've said this a few times too, and I think this is also one of the things I'm trying to get from this to learn that we can help going forward. There's information and data that prove this wrong. However, whatever it is keeping the Deltas and L'Oreals and all the others from doing something. Why would they not look? It's like the cost of being incorrect isn't high enough. They're like, yeah, let's go talk some misinformation. That's really what they're doing. Let's go send something that's untrue, that's not even close or remotely good for the environment, and tell everybody we're doing this. And that's the missing piece that I am just determined to just be that be that other side that just is like, you got to think this through, people. You got to think this through. That's not true. And I don't know, man. I struggle with this a lot. And if you have any thoughts now, later, and I don't mean to throw you on the spot, but we've got to change this narrative. We've got to get people to at least, pay attention to this. And the other thing too, is a lot of times, and again, this is just another side note, when I looked up this, and I did a deep dive internally on this cosmetics company because I wanted to find, and I was never, and by the way, and if you ever look at your posts or Chris's or anybody else out there, none of the others, I've never seen anybody on our side be nasty. We always fight fair. We're always just trying to just focus on this. Here's a link to, a Harvard study or a link to this study, whatever. Just read the facts. But it seems like the other side is nasty. The other side is going to attack. And that is a problem. That is kind of like they've made themselves out to be if you cross us, we're going to cut your legs off, man. Don't cross us. We're Greenpeace. But if anyone looked at, and I did a post and a video on Greenpeace, the founder isn't even involved with Greenpeace anymore.
Yes.
He's long gone. He said, I want nothing to do with this place. It's become corrupt. I want nothing to do with it. And we're spending. So anyhow, what do we do? How do we change this just so companies like the Pack Scout, companies that are truly for just sharing information, making sure your customers make the right decisions, are fully informed, make an educated decision, not just one out of emotion. Any thoughts in your magic wand? What do we do? Because this is a big deal.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. Part of it is trying to get the heads of packaging in those brand companies, the more resources and wins for them so that they can have more scope and influence to be able to make bigger changes. So at the moment, I even had one recently where I was doing a survey on brand advertising, so QR codes and activation. It's still bizarre to me that something that is physically part of the packaging. So, at some point, somebody in the packaging department of a company has to be responsible for getting that code onto the bottle or pack or whatever it is. And yet they are regularly the last to kind of be there. So if they can kind of have more power, they can have more influence, they've got more resources so that they can start to show the rest of the company why leading with technology first is going to get you faster solutions to what those consumers are asking for. You can't market it to the consumers. You have to make it and get it to them.
Got to serve it up to them on a platter so they can consume it. If you make them have to think beyond this, and it's just John Q. Public, but I agree with you. If we stop letting the consumer think that they know any better, if we serve the real information up to them where they can consume it, and big brands as well. I mean, I'm with you. That's how we'll start to make change.
And then the other part to it is that there's one of the things that we learned in the early days in sales, so this is going back 20 years now, was that there's a thing called a transfer of ownership. So basically nobody buys something unless they can see themselves using it. Whatever it is, if I can't see myself driving that car, living in that house, whatever, I'm not going to buy it. And that goes from little to large. So the most efficient way for the kind of the top salespeople has always been to get them to that transfer of ownership as quickly as possible. So hence it's that you talk about consultative sales or problem solving, whatever it is, to shift it from here's this thing that I have, so here's this thing that you need and you can see yourself using. So to get to that stage, the transfer of ownership to the consumers, the other part to it for those heads of packaging and those brand companies, those people who are the key opinion leaders, the people that can really make the biggest difference, as well as having more resources so that they can start to really drive that for their own companies. The other parts to it is that they are constantly saying kind of the same thing, which is the technology needs to be scalable and it needs to be an attractive price. The attractive price will come with scale, but if you give me a technology that I can't scale, then we're dead in the water, because I can't take something that's going to be less effective, more expensive, and just take longer to make and present 100%. That to my company. For them, the thing that's going to help them do their job better is to have technology that fits into that scale and cost model. Focuses on that, gives them wins in that category, because by having those wins in that category, they'll grow their influence, because the company will start to say, we're seeing an uptake in, this packaging is selling better, or it's being recycled more frequently, or whatever the metrics are that they're choosing to use for success. And that will hopefully send that department or that specific person or their team more resources, because they'll say, well, this is working. We're going to keep on backing that up. That's the way to kind of start turning the oil tanker. And then the other way is through, kind of innovation. But innovation is a much trickier one, because I had years ago, it's nearly 10 years ago, I had a article in the earlier version of LinkedIn that was very successful, which was talking about innovation versus just improvement. So the idea being that packaging innovation, so at the time it was things like squashed, so those cordials that came in a little squeeze thing, like Mio in the US has got it as well. And now they're, Crystal Light, they're all over the shop now. I think probably at least 10, 15 brands now do them. But when Britvic started it in 2014, 2015, they were giving customers something that they'd never had. We didn't realize you could take your cordial, on the move and put it into water wherever you found it. When people like Lucozade changed the cap on sports drinks, on Lucozade drinks, so that you could flick it and drink it one-handed, that was the result of a lot of market research, where we're talking about how people use their product. And of course, everyone's different. So one person took Lucozade. So if you think about having like a thing of Powerade or Gatorade, they're a swimmer. So they left their bottle floating in the water, and then they would do 10 laps and have a drink, 10 laps, have a drink.
Pick it up as get out.
So that, so they're like, we have to find it so that it meets that person, as well as the rock climber or the cyclist 100%. Or the walker or they were even saying, like if you've got a mother or a father who's driving the car and you've got kids in the back who are acting up, you need to be able to open it, pass it back without taking your eyes off the road. So all of that, that kind of mentality of giving people what they didn't know they needed, but they really, like you really moved. So those are the two kind of routes I would say are going to be the ways to start seeing that turn happen. You either take the big leap, which is a kind of more swinging for the fences, or incrementally inside the companies, you get those people who, I in a previous role had more of a pharmaceutical focus. And the pharmaceutical industry, what I loved about it is that it's got a lot of parallels to packaging. If you take the gates of different drug trials, so like series 1, 2, 3, 4, as they kind of go through the process, the way that happens is that you get a leading doctor from, John Hopkins or Harvard or, some leading authority. They will be the ones that run those trials. And so they're picked because they're the people who are the kind of the best of the best of the best. And what they're looking for is that person's opinion, because ultimately that matters more than, just a doctor.
An influencer.
Exactly.
Sure.
So what happens is at the end of it, when it gets to stage 3 and they're sort of providing their notes to people and saying it's great or rubbish or whatever it is, that really effectively will kill or make that brand, that product. And in packaging, we have the same setup. There are people who buy all the materials for like a major brand or like, have responsibility for, huge multi-million, if not billion-dollar budgets. And those are the people that we need to give them more ability to kind of do their job with less influence or kind of, you want them to be able to kind of continue to do things as they feel, because they will have
we've got to give them the power. That was something that, and unfortunately, I don't know if you follow or know Keith Barnes.
Yes.
But Keith is a Michigan State professor, and he and I interviewed him on this podcast too, and we were lamenting the fact that, being a professor at Michigan State and packaging, it's a very prestigious position. They've got no shortage of people that are going through this. What he and I both know that over the last 20, 25 years, I remember working with companies and they would bring in a packaging engineer and say, all packaging goes through Chuck or Bob or Larry or Sally or whoever that is. But those people were making, 85, 100 grand a year, and they had power. And then quickly they said, as companies were cutting corners and shaving cost, they took those people away, or they put in somebody that literally isn't a packaging engineer, and they're not making 85 or 6 figures. They push the packaging engineering to the supplier. And we've taken that power, because what you've said over and over, and what I totally agree on, and so does Keith Barnes when we were chatting with him, is we have to have the power in the hands of people that are handling the packaging. Oftentimes it's not, or they're not being paid attention to, or no one's, they're just, it goes from a buyer or somebody saying, I need X, and it literally goes to whoever that decision maker is that places the order or whatever it is. And meanwhile, the packaging person is the one that's kind of slicing and dicing and coming up with stuff. But if that packaging person isn't in charge or have the power to say, no, Delta, this is not a good idea because of this and this, and hold them accountable for it. I mean, again, we're saying the same thing, but it drives me crazy because we've taken a lot of the power out of the hands of packaging engineers that have probably the most important role in this. We're seeing our world flooded with packaging and problems with packaging and people littering, and that's another subject and all this. The point is that we're thinking of it at the last second. We're not paying the attention that it needs, even though it's so critical to products, so critical to staying fresher for longer, shelf life, the whole bit. We're not paying attention to that. And that's something that I just really wish and hope that there's a company or companies out there that are willing to be that method soap, if you will, and say, here's why. And again, in this technology nowadays, I mean, I was going through a factory, and between QR codes and some other things that you can do, you can literally encourage people to scan a cup, a bottle, a bag, whatever it is, that literally tells the story. Here's why we're doing this, Mr. John Q. Public. Want to know about our packaging? Here, click here. And they can scan it with their phone. That'll take them to, here's the data. This is not our opinion. And this is an opinion, and we're totally missing out on that, Matthew. We're totally missing out on this. I know we're saying the same thing, and it just drives me crazy, but we've got to figure out how to change this oil tanker, how to turn this oil tanker, how to change the narrative, how to just get people to stay. And by the way, and I said this earlier, the other side oftentimes doesn't fight fair. They don't want to hear the other side. They're just going to talk louder. Oh, no. You don't look, there's floating garbage in the ocean. See, that's all you. Or like Chris had said, if you've ever seen the famous turtle with a plastic bag on him, which by the way was never true, that was photoshopped, and he found that out. But that's what people run with because that's what they've seen. And that's part of the problem. Would you agree?
Yeah. And I also, you touched on a very true but very interesting point where when we started the packaging forums, there's a thing called PACE, so Packaging and Converting Executives Forums. And the format was essentially you'd have about 50 or 60 brand owners, and they would write contracts that would say, I want to speak to suppliers of X technology, and I want to learn about these things in the conference program. So that was how it was all kind of brought together. And the people who were the delegates, the brand owners who attended, they had to recommend, specify, and authorize the packaging budget. If occasionally we would find somebody who could maybe recommend and specify but not authorize because procurement were in charge. But the majority of people could do all three. And what that meant was that, there was a lot more, contracts were kind of much more seamless because
of course
you have the technology I'm looking for, and then we agree on a price, and then we'll pilot it and we'll scale it. We'll go from there. But in the last 3 or 4 years, so I left the event. It's still going as of 2021, 2022, but I left there in about 2010, 2011. And in the last 4 or 5 years in particular, that statement is very true that, you don't have a person who can recommend and specify and authorize the packaging budget. And what that means is that, you'll get teams. So, maybe one person is, and some of that makes sense. Okay. So maybe somebody's the closures expert and the liner expert, and the label expert and the container expert.
Right.
But all that's happening is you're diluting the ability of one central person to be able to say, okay, this is what the whole thing's going to look like. This whole thing probably isn't going to make it through. Today it's also too much to hope that person has any kind of mechanical engineering experience, because the biggest development. So for Keith and things like Michigan State, like in the UK, the technical degree that I got was the Institute of Mining, Metallurgy and Materials, IOLM, which he's also a leader of. And the part of that degree that was most interesting to me was the engineering part, packaging machinery part, because the guy who was running it was a guy called David Rose, who had run Pepsi's UK operations for a while. And, our first lecture, he just said, think of this. The moment you add something to the packaging line, you lose efficiency. And if you think of any packaging line, it's got at least 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things. Yeah. So he said, if you can finish with 70%, efficiency, that's gold standard. He's most people are 40 or 50%. And so you need to have somebody who has both the visibility of all the packaging and then the understanding that they're going to have to find a way of sending it through that kind of bottleneck to make it as efficiently as possible. And everything's been so separated out in the last few years that you don't tend to find those people. And then they can't authorize because procurement knew anyone's allowed to authorize, and procurement have got a completely different set of requirements. Basically pay less at all times. That's their job.
Yep.
So, they're
Yep.
always going to be doing their job, and their job's not to kind of find the thing that's going to be the most sustainable option or the kind of
Correct.
most innovative or the best marketing or whatever, or best material. It's
Yep.
just cheapest because that's what
Yep.
they get, that's what they're paid to do. So I think it's definitely true that, like if we can get those people to have a head of department, go back to that classic VP of packaging or packaging development or packaging
100%.
engineering, because those people who I was talking to 20 years ago, who are the ones who helped me really understand the packaging
Same.
industry to the level that I
Same.
do today, is
Yep.
just because they're engineers, that all day, every
Yep.
day, they are struggling with
Yep.
these problems. So when you sort of say to them,
Yep.
what are the trends in packaging? What are the challenges? What are the
Yep.
opportunities? They can
Yep.
give you a laundry list because they do it every single day. And
Every day.
there aren't those people anymore. They're still, some of them are still senior members of companies, but they don't have that.
Very few that I've seen, Matthew, and I hear you 100%. And that's why I want to at least present a voice or be a voice or curate, bring people together, because I remember specifically, and I know you'll appreciate this, the Hoover Company, vacuum cleaning company, is an Ohio company. And way back when, that was one of my big grand slams in the packaging space, because I didn't go through the buying department. I went through the packaging engineer department, and it found they had 3 packaging engineers. One, the head guy, was that one like you described. He's in the mix every single day. And frankly, he had such a problem with some sort of film that was causing the abrasion on their ABS plastic or whatever it was. But he said, kid, if you can find me a solution for this, that'll work. That's going to be less than the 21 cents per vacuum cleaner we're paying to fix this right now. I'll march this up through purchasing and demand that they buy. And that's kind of how that worked. Now, it was several back and forth of iterations of this thing, but we had to, but that was exactly how that happened, was he spec'd it in through all of their packaging, and he had that power. I haven't found a packaging engineer since then that has that kind of, and that's sort of what maybe we have to change that narrative in some way. Maybe that's something we need to encourage a company to. That's going to be tough because, again, when you're cutting corners and you're trying to maximize shareholder value and all this other kind of stuff. But goodness gracious, we're talking about the environment. We're talking about, trying to help the next generation, our children, our children's children. And we can't just keep doing the same crap we've been doing. We just can't.
I think most of these companies, unfortunately, only learn through suffering. So they've got to really get it wrong, and then
Right.
they use that as an opportunity to kind of learn and do better. My favorite example in the packaging industry of that in action, and which speaks to a company doing exactly what we're talking about, like making a massive error and then that shifting them to be, now they've got a packaging department that is much more senior, much more involved in the mix.
Oh, I'd love to hear about it.
So,
Please tell us.
Back in 2007, probably I think it's pre-2008. So there's a company called Campina. It's now Friesland Campina, which is a dairy company, and they make a product called Yazoo, which is a chocolate milk, which comes in a sort of a PT bottle with a shrink sleeve label. At the time, the procurement team were the kind of second in command in the company. So it went kind of CEO and then kind of procurement, and then way down the pecking order was somebody in engineering. And they had found a source of the film, that the shrink sleeve, that was significantly cheaper, like 30%, 40% cheaper. And so they went and bought it, as was their role, and they sent this down the packaging line that we were just talking about, and nobody in the entire process had checked the width and the thickness, and it was about 0.5 micron or 1 micron too thick. So it made it about a third of the way through the machinery and then just completely stopped. Because of course it was that kind of shrink sleeve, so it was that horrible kind of gluey PVC kind of like finish. They had to disassemble the machinery to a cog level, like completely to its guts, clean it all off, put it back together, get the right width and thickness of material, had that down the line. In the end, it was something like 20 million euros and about a one month like offline period, all for them to save what was, I think they'd saved initially maybe €1 million. After that, immediately, first of all, they got bought, and when they merged companies, the other one, who's also another Dutch company, sort of saw this and was like, well, we're not doing that again. So what happened was it completely 180. So what happened after that is that the engineering people and the research and development people were next in line. And what the company said was, well, we made this huge mistake. And what we learned from it is that we need the person who is responsible for manufacturing, has an engineering mindset, is looking at it from a much more practical perspective. And then at the end of that discussion, we're going to then bring in the procurement people as kind of negotiators, and they will get the best price, but they'll get the best price with direction from the people who are actually making the product.
Wow.
That's my kind of favorite example of exactly what we're talking about now. Like, unfortunately, most companies that I've come across that have, made those massive pivots
they swept it under the rug.
Yeah.
And I see this, and I know we could talk for hours. I'll wrap us up here and land the plane here, but I see that too when it comes to product recalls and some other things, which again, oftentimes can be related back or traced back to certain types of materials that actually, sometimes there are products that are packaged incorrectly that nobody pays attention to, that gets to the retail level and they have to recall it. Whether it's cheese or chicken or what, we've all seen it. And those are the kind of things, just like you described, if they would have thought this through, whatever savings they thought they were going to get was probably 50 times more in the recall, insurance claim, and having to rerun. Customer loyalty goes out the window. You lose a lot more than that. And that's sort of where, part of you and I chatting is to try to change that narrative of the need for somebody in packaging that has the power to at least stand equal. He doesn't have to be, the hammer, but to be able to stand equal with purchasing, equal with design, equal with marketing. So he's not some guy they think of at the last minute to go, hey, call Chuck, we got to get a box for this thing, and that's just when it just doesn't work. But I'm so grateful. I really appreciate you taking the time for this. And how do people learn about the Pack Scout? Is that something they just come to your website? Is that something they're, are you going to trade shows? How do people connect with you?
They can look at the website. So the website's probably got most of my information, which is just
it's thepackscout.com.
Yeah. Then I'm under, I think it's LinkedIn have got me as Matt Rogerson on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Then I've also got Instagram as @thepackscout. And then there's YouTube where I'm kind of slowly but surely building up a series of videos talking about different things. But most of that will migrate towards the website.
Yeah, and I'll share everything that I've got for you on there because I think it's important. This is all about sharing information and making connections. And like you, I really hope that we can continue doing this together because we've got to make it's going to be guys like us and gals like us that can talk like this and just, man, that's not right, and again, like I told you before, we're trying to create this community of people just sharing information, and what they do with it is up to them. But please don't pat yourself on the back, Delta Airlines, that you're doing something great when you haven't really paid attention. Is that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, the thing that I think I see in the industry the most these days is that there's still this kind of idea that there's like an easier, softer way. There's a way of kind of cutting the corner or ways of kind of getting to that kind of big win without having to kind of put in the effort. And that's the thing that, time and time again is not going to happen, especially in the packaging industry. Like, it is something that has to get physically manufactured and moved, and it's a physical product. So the more that we can get people who are actually responsible for, making the product and how it navigates through to a consumer to have a seat at the table, at least, if not to be kind of in charge, then the less likely it is that you're going to run into those kind of recalls or, like critical fail.
And unfortunately, and I can only speak really from the US, but we have always been fat and happy and very, very lazy here. And it's just sort of like you said, there's this shortcut or quicker way, or somebody said, oh, I know a guy that can do that for you, 20% cheaper. That's how people in companies get into trouble and really make these massive mistakes. I would love it if, those companies, and again, your example that you said of that company that learned the hard way and actually made it part of their value prop going forward, saying, we're not doing this again. No, 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 no. Here's why. That actually, talk about coming full circle. But there's so many people that are like, oh, don't talk about it. It never happened. Sweep it under the rug. And I mean, it's just, no, we got to be able to learn from our mistakes. It's just what we teach our kids. I mean, come on, learn from your mistakes. Do something different. Don't keep doing the same thing. Well, Matthew, I really enjoyed this, my friend. If there's anything I can do, we can do to help spread your message, please let us know. I'd love it if one of these events that we're at personally, we'll go out and have a coffee or a pint or something together and spend some time together. But yeah, I'm so grateful for you taking the time with us. You shared a great information. So thank you again.
Thank you, David. It's been an absolute pleasure.